Welcome back again, everyone. It's DinaKalmeta here. And for today's news, I do have some updates I'd like to share with you. We're going to talk about what's going on in the Middle East with the United States, Iran, and Israel. We're also going to talk about what's happening with Russia and Syria. I have some new developments there. And also, I want to talk about Europe. Apparently, they're looking to become their own superpower that doesn't need the United States anymore. So a lot to get caught up on. Let's dig in. Let's start with the Middle East. And a report written by Michael Schneider of the most important news, the end of the American dream, and the economic collapse. He goes on to write, the bombing of Iran is off, at least for now. As we entered the weekend, there was all sorts of chatter that indicated that a U.S. attack could be imminent. But I also warned that President Trump could make a sudden decision to change direction. He has done this many times during his presidency, and so it has become very difficult to predict what Trump will do until he finally does it. For the moment, we can breathe easy because missiles are not flying all over the Middle East. But military preparations for a final showdown with Iran are continuing just in case last-ditch peace talks fail. When Iran was rocked by two very large explosions on Saturday, a lot of people were fearing the worst. Thankfully, it's being reported that both of those explosions were accidental. But when those explosions were first reported, social media was really freaking out because there was a tremendous amount of speculation that war with Iran had begun. The good news is at this stage, it does not appear that war with Iran is imminent. The following are 6 signs that a war with Iran has been postponed. Number 1, the Wall Street Journal is telling us that our military leaders have concluded that more air defenses need to be deployed to the Middle East before the U.S. is ready to launch a decisive attack on the Iranian regime. And moving a THAAD battery is not easy. There are only 7 of them in existence. And so the fact that they are going to such trouble to move one to the Middle East is particularly a strong sign that the U.S. is preparing for a potential conflict. Number 2, the Times of Israel is reporting that Iran and the United States will resume nuclear talks on Friday in Turkey. But President Trump warned that with the United States warships heading to Iran, bad things would probably happen if a deal could not be reached. He went on to say that we have ships heading to Iran right now, big ones, the biggest and the best, and we have talks going on with Iran. And we'll see how it all works out. If we can work something out, that would be great. And if we can't, probably bad things would happen. I'd like to see a deal negotiated. I don't know that that's going to happen. Number 3, there were numerous reports that Iran was planning to conduct live fire exercises in the Strait of Hormuz. The fact that these live fire exercises are not going to happen is being interpreted as a promising sign. President Trump's response to a provocative quote from the Ayatollah gave us a glimpse into what he is thinking at the moment. The leader of Iran had warned that a U.S. attack on Iran would cause a regional war. So when asked about this, President Trump responded by expressing hope that a deal will be made. In fact, he went on to say, why wouldn't he say that? Of course you can say that. But we have the biggest, most powerful ships in the world over there, very close, couple of days. Hopefully we'll make a deal. We don't make a deal, then we'll find out whether or not he was right. This seems to indicate that President Trump will give negotiations a period of time to succeed before a military operation is initiated. Number 5, Israeli officials are very well informed about what President Trump is thinking, and at this point their assessment is that an attack on Iran is unlikely to take place this week. Number 6, according to the Jerusalem Post, the IDF chief made a secret visit to Washington over the weekend, and he believes that a U.S. attack on Iran will not happen for at least 2 weeks. So everything that we are seeing indicates that an attack on Iran has been delayed. But of course, giving Iran more time to prepare could end up backfiring. Iran International has reported that the regime is developing biological and chemical warheads for the country's long-range ballistic missiles. So when a full-blown war finally erupts, the Iranians will throw everything that they have at Israeli cities and U.S. bases in the region. And then things will get really, really Crazy. Now, in the meantime, Jerusalem is moving to secure its future amidst this chaos. Reports indicate that Israel is seeking to lock in a new decade-long security deal with Washington. They know what is coming. Former senior IDF commanders are even warning that Israel might have to attack Iran before the United States does to preempt a retaliatory strike that could imperil the Jewish state. Now, just today, Fox News is reporting that the U.S. military shot down an Iranian drone approaching the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea. Apparently, the USS Abraham Lincoln was transitioning the Arabian Sea approximately 500 miles from Iran's southern coast when an Iranian Shahed 139 drone unnecessarily maneuvered towards the ship. The Iranian drone continued to fly towards the ship despite de-escalatory measures taken by U.S. forces operating in international waters. An F-35C fighter jet from Abraham Lincoln shot down the Iranian drone in self-defense and to protect the aircraft carrier and personnel on board. No one was injured and no equipment was damaged by the incident, but it's definitely an escalation in tensions. It's also been reported that during a separate incident, hours later in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's Revolutionary Guard forces harassed a U.S.-flagged, U.S.-crewed merchant vessel lawfully transitioning the international sea passage. Apparently, 2 IRGC boats and an Iranian drone approached the MV Stena Imperative at high speeds and threatened to board and seize the tanker. The guided missile destroyer USS McFall was operating in the area and immediately responded to the scene to escort the MV Imperative with defensive air support from the U.S. Air Force. The situation de-escalated as a result, and the U.S. flagged tanker is proceeding safely. So some tensions already, and the talks haven't really began yet. So I guess we're just going to have to wait to see how these talks go. But hopefully in the meantime, there aren't any more of these escalatory moves by Iran. Now, with that said, the Middle East fire isn't burning in isolation. The fuel is coming from the north. Putin has reportedly met with the Syrian president to discuss sending Russian military aid directly into this theater. This is a critical escalation. If Russia begins actively supplying advanced weaponry to Syrian or Iranian proxies, while the U.S. military is sitting in the Gulf, we are no longer looking at regional skirmish. We are looking at a proxy war between superpowers on a biblical territory. Now let's pause for just a moment and talk about the prophecies in Isaiah and Ezekiel. There is a prophecy in Isaiah chapter 17, verse 1, and it goes on to read, "The burden of Damascus," meaning Damascus, Syria. "Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap," meaning it will be uninhabitable. Yes, it looks like a disaster right now, but eventually it's going to be completely wiped out, according to this verse. Well, many people have wondered, how is this going to happen? And there are a few different ideas out there, but if Russia brings weapons into Syria and Israel happens to attack Damascus in the future, and those weapons are nuclear, well, that would definitely make it a ruinous heap. Some even say that there are weapons buried underneath Damascus. And if Israel were to strike, again, it would become a ruinous heap. But those are just possibilities. Nobody really knows. But I also want to mention that moving Russia back into Syria again makes them that much closer to Israel. And we know what the prophecy says in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. God will put a hook in Russia's jaw, and Russia, along with Iran and Turkey and other nations, will try to invade Israel. They will lose the battle because God will be the one that will come out victorious and will defend Israel. The United States is not mentioned in this prophecy. Now, the timing of the event, well, some people say pre-trib, some people say after the rapture, most likely mid-trib, but nobody really completely knows. We do know, however, what scripture says. Israel will be living in a false type of peace. Their walls will be down. So it doesn't really look like that right now, but it could change once that Daniel 9:27 peace covenant is confirmed by the Antichrist that places Israel as well as many other nations into a false peace for 7 years. The doomsday clock isn't just ticking, the alarm is going off. And what's happening in the Middle East right now is a very serious situation. And hopefully cooler heads will prevail, but only time will tell. And as always, I'll continue to keep you updated. But I would like to move along and talk about what is going on in Europe. As I mentioned earlier in the show, they're looking to become their own superpower with their own military that doesn't need the United States. Prophecy News Watch reports an emergency summit of European Union leaders in Brussels. The building blocks of a new continental order were quietly taking shape. Europe is no longer debating abstract ideals. It is actively pursuing the foundation of a super Europe. Bigger, stronger, and capable of standing independently in a world dominated by unpredictable powers. The driving force behind this transformation is unmistakable: Donald Trump. His blunt transactional approach to diplomacy, demanding greater burden sharing, questioning alliances, and challenging long-standing norms, exposed Europe's vulnerability. For decades, the continent relied on American guarantees for security, trade, and stability. But President Trump stripped away that assumption, forcing Europe to confront a stark reality: dependence is a risk. The German chancellor even said this is not a cozy place. Europe has got the message. A day after the summit, Merz signed an accord pledging close coordination with Italy's Meloni, signaling that Europe's two most influential leaders are aligned in their vision of integration. The European Commission president also acknowledged the challenge, stating that we know that we have to work for a more independent Europe. This is not something which happens overnight. This is hard work. When Europe is not divided, when we stand together, and when we are clear and strong, results will show. I think we have learned something in the last days and weeks. And here is where history and prophecy converge. For centuries, scholars have identified Europe as their heir to the ancient Roman Empire. The prophet Daniel envisioned a final kingdom, symbolized by a statue whose 10 toes were partly iron and partly clay, strong yet fragile, united yet fractured. Revelation describes a coalition of nations that ultimately consolidates power under a single leader. From the Holy Roman Empire to modern EU institutions, the impulse is to unify Europe under centralized authority that has repeatedly resurfaced, especially in moments of crisis. Many theologians believe that the Antichrist will emerge from this framework, not as a chaotic revolutionary, but as a polished political figure offering order and stability, peace amid fear. Ironically, in reacting to external pressure from leaders like President Trump, European elites are accelerating the centralization of power, reducing national sovereignty, sidelining dissenting states, and empowering supranational institutions in ways that align uncannily with the prophetic vision. This is not to suggest that Europe's ambitions are inherently sinister. Cooperation can prevent war, and collective defense can deter aggression. But history shows that empires rarely remain purely administrative. Power centralizes. Crises justifies control. Leaders arise who promise salvation at a cost. President Trump did not create Europe's imperial instinct. He exposed it by stripping away the illusion of guaranteed American backing. He forced Europe to choose between dependence and dominance. Europe has chosen to integrate rapidly, deliberately, and with growing confidence. One thing is undeniable: Europe is no longer merely a participant in world affairs. It is preparing to rule within them. Now, as far as the European military, Poland is building the most modern army in Europe and NATO, with defense spending reaching nearly 5% of its GDP, aiming for the largest, most modern land forces. Germany is shifting away from its post-1945 stance, investing heavily to establish a massive conventional army by 2035. And EU officials are pushing for a 100,000-strong standing force, aiming to unify 27 7 separate armies into a more cohesive, powerful entity, with 2026 seeing renewed momentum. Total EU defense spending is projected to make Europe the world's second biggest spender, focusing on filling gaps in logistics, ammunition, and modernization. So they're looking for a huge military. Meanwhile, the East is making its move. The Chinese ambassador to Moscow has issued a blistering statement claiming U.S. actions in the Arctic contradict Beijing's interests and undermine global stability. Think about that. China is now declaring the Arctic, thousands of miles from its borders, as a zone of core interest. And President Trump has responded aggressively to the news that Canada and the UK are holding talks with China, warning our allies against cozying up. Now, with that said, the Chinese president said that the country needs to build a strong currency and aims to make the yuan a global reserve currency. He expressed his hopes to make the yuan widely used in international trade, investment, and foreign exchange markets. The Chinese president laid out his vision in a speech, which was published on Saturday, and interestingly, he delivered the speech in 2024 to provincial and ministerial officials, sharing his ambition to make China a global financial powerhouse. The excerpts of the Chinese president's speech were published over the weekend and outlined what he described as the attributes to become a financial powerhouse, i.e., a strong economic foundation, world-leading economic and technological strength, and a widely used and credible currency. He also said that a financial powerhouse required a central bank that would implement effective monetary policy and macroprudential management, globally competitive financial institutions, and international financial centers that could attract international capital and exert influence over global pricing. So very interesting news here. Here we have Europe looking to be the world superpower, and now look at China. They're looking to be the financial powerhouse of the world. And here is another report in regards to China. They just don't want to be a financial superpower. They've picked up the game militarily. Apparently, they have unveiled plans for a futuristic Star Wars space carrier that can deploy nearly 100 unmanned fighter jets and fly to the edge of the Earth's atmosphere. The warship, set to be the biggest in the world if it's ever made, is being designed to carry up to 88 unmanned Huan-Nu fighter jets. These planes, still in their conceptual stage, will be designed to be highly maneuverable stealth aircraft capable of launching hypersonic missiles. But apparently it will not be in the skies until around 20 or 30 years from now. So a long time into the future, but they are working on this. Now, in the meantime, China's good friend and neighbor, North Korea, set off multiple missiles last week because that's just what he does. Don't want to leave anybody out, so let's talk about Venezuela really quick. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told U.S. senators that America is prepared to use force to ensure Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, cooperates. In fact, his words were, "We are prepared to use force to ensure maximum cooperation if other methods fail. It is our hope that this will not prove necessary, but we will never shy away from our duty to the American people and our mission in this hemisphere." Now, of course, we're not at war with Venezuela, but the United States is definitely starting to stretch out her fingers and take control of this region. And speaking of which, over in Cuba, President Trump has sent a warning. Earlier this week, the president signed an executive order to impose tariffs on goods from any countries that sell oil to Cuba, further strengthening an embargo against a Caribbean nation which dates back to 1960s. The move comes after last month's capture of the Venezuelan leader, and Venezuela had served as Cuba's primary source of oil. Mexico had increased oil deliveries to Cuba in recent weeks, and the Mexican president warned on Friday that the U.S. president's order could trigger a large-scale humanitarian crisis directly affecting hospitals, food supplies, and other basic services for the Cuban people. When asked about the comments by journalists aboard Air Force One on Saturday, the president said, "Well, it doesn't have to be a humanitarian crisis. I think they probably will come to us and want to make a deal, so Cuba would be free again. We have a situation that's very bad for Cuba. They have no money. They have no oil. They lived off Venezuelan money and oil, and none of that's coming now." The U.S. president had expressed confidence that the sides will work out a deal, and Washington would be kind to Cuba. Now, here's another very interesting headline. Vietnam is secretly preparing for a second invasion by the U.S. You can't make this stuff up, you guys. Vietnam's military secretly drafted plans for a potential conflict with the U.S., according to a leaked document released by a human rights group. The classified assessment compiled by Vietnam's Ministry of Defense in August 2024 is titled The Second U.S. Invasion Plan and was made public on Tuesday by Project 88. So they're actually expecting or contemplating an invasion by the U.S. I thought we were friends now. Maybe somebody in the comments can give me your take. Apparently, 150,000 protesters marched in Toronto, Canada to demand a regime change in Iran. And look who they're asking to do it. President Trump. 150,000 people took to the streets of downtown Toronto on Sunday to march in solidarity with the people of Iran and call for regime change and freedom from the authoritarian Islamic regime. Many carried photos of Iranian protesters whose lives have been taken during the crackdown against civilians. Many similar massive events have been occurring in Toronto and around the world in recent weeks. Now, here's my question. Where is the United States in this? We have lots of marches, and it's okay to have a peaceful march. It's freedom of speech. It's a way of expressing ourselves. We've even had Jesus marches, so there's nothing wrong with it. Now, I notice that some organizations in the United States will march for other regions, such as Gaza recently. But why aren't those same people marching for the Iranian people who are being massively abused? Where are they? I don't know. Doesn't make sense to me. Maybe somebody in the comments can give me your take. Russia threatens to nuke Elon Musk's Starlink with a strike in space. Like I said, you can't make this stuff up. But one of Putin's most prominent TV propagandists was the one that called for a strike on Starlink. And apparently it came after Elon Musk acted to block Kremlin forces using the satellite internet constellation without authorization in order to attack Ukraine. So good for Elon for blocking that. But Vladimir Solovyov said, let's tell the truth about what Starlink is. It is the militarization of space, because everything that Musk has worked on, everything that we see now, is in the interests of a war against Russia. So he went on to ask the question, I do not understand why, for example, Elon Musk's satellites are not a legitimate target for us. One detonation of nuclear weapons in space, as I understand it, solves this problem quite seriously. But unfortunately, an expert told him a nuclear explosion in space is not selective. It affects our equipment as well. So that's not going to work out too well for Russia. And over in Ukraine, ahead of the upcoming trilateral talks on the war in Ukraine, Zelensky wrote on Telegram that he expects an active U.S. Much depends on what the U.S. can achieve, he said. The meeting between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States will be held on February 4th and 5th in Abu Dhabi, according to Zelensky. The Ukrainian president expects the U.S. to take an equally active role, especially when it comes to de-escalation measures. Now, this announcement comes after talks between Russian and American envoys over the weekend in Miami. We are seeing the convergence of every major geopolitical fault line. The headlines are no longer just news, they are warnings. We are watching history and prophecy unfold in real time. The question isn't just, are you keeping up? The question is, are you prepared? These nations right now are literally on knife edge. One match lit and all chaos is going to break out. We are that close to World War III. That's what I think anyways. But I'd love to get your thoughts. What do you think about what's going on in the Middle East? What about with Russia and Syria, or even what's happening in Europe? Let me know in the comments. Also, when you have a free moment, come and visit me on my social media pages, as well as my website. And also don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss a show. But that's what I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, God bless and stay safe.